Hello and welcome to this module in the HTML Fundamentals course, focusing on text elements in HTML. My name is Matt Milner, and I'm going to guide you through this module. Now, while the module is about text elements, when you think about HTML documents, primarily they were focused on text when originally intended. Now, today when you go to a website, you end up seeing a lot of images and flash videos and all sorts of things that aren't textual. But the focus of HTML was originally documents and document text. So we'll be talking about things such as headings, but also things like block and inline elements, or this notion of as I'm adding things to the document, how are they going to be handled and rendered within the document? Some of those things will contain text, but they may also be generic containers for other items. We'll talk about text breaking and white space a little bit, how you can control where things break or where they don't, and formatting. And then we'll talk about a variety of elements you can use to call out specific text, or maybe you're using abbreviations, quotations, you're referencing other things, or you're including things like code snippets or keyboard input that you want somebody to type. We'll start our discussion of text by looking at headings. Headings are the way that you're going to break up your document and identify the various sections within that document to call your reader's attention to the various chunks of information that are present. Typically, you'll start by using a single H1 element, somewhere near the top of your page often, that's the primary heading for your document. This calls out what the intent is, what the primary focus is. It's also used by search engines. If you think about it, if you're searching for something, and that search term happens to show up as the primary heading of a document, chances are good it might contain information that you're interested in. And we also have headings that go all the way from H2 to H6, so we have the various subheadings for those other sections of your document. And you want to consider the semantics as you do this, because you don't necessarily want to have a heading 2 and then underneath that have a heading 1. All right, you want to kind of look at the structure of the document and use those headings to break it up appropriately. As I said, you probably want a single H1 on the page. That's a good practice, and it's also something that will help with the search engines. What I have here is a simple HTML document, and in the body just a representative example of these headings. So you can see the H1 element here identifies the first level heading, and I close that out with the closing tag. And if you look in the browser on the right, you'll notice that they get rendered out in various sizes based on the heading level. This is pretty typical for all browsers. And what I'll caution against is that you don't want to choose a heading tag or an H tag here in order to get the right size of font. You want to use styles for that. You want to apply some stylistic font sizes and font styles to your text to get it to look the way you want. Use the headings really as that organizational piece and use it for the semantic meaning in which it was intended. Let's clean this up a little bit. So for my H1, I'm going to say this is my HTML fundamentals. So I'm going to create a page all about the course here. And then as an H2, I might have an overview. And underneath that, we might have something like objectives for our learning objectives. And maybe we want to have a section here on the outline. So we'll get rid of a couple of these. I don't necessarily need those. Now I think the outline and the objectives are really all part of the overview section. So I'm going to change the outline back to an H3 and have that come in as the same level as the objectives here. So we'll save that. And now I have an outline of the structure of my document. So I'm going to have an overview. Underneath that I have some objectives and an outline that I can create in here. That's the use of the headings to really lay out those various sections within your document. As you begin working with your document and the various elements you can use to encapsulate content, it's important to understand how the browser is going to interpret, based on the specification, those various items. Some items are going to be considered block elements. Those are containers for grouping things together, maybe just text, or a variety of items. You could have a group that contains a whole section of your document. Those block elements can contain other block elements and inline elements. So as we get into the examples, you'll see use of things like the div tag, which allows you to create a division of your page or a section of your page that you want to wrap in a container and treat as a single unit for some purposes. You also have the P element or the paragraph element, which allows you to specify a chunk of text or other elements that you consider a paragraph. So in the example, the two top-level block elements are paragraphs of text, but they might also contain links to other documents or a variety of other inline elements. The bottom example is a quote, a block quote, which is rendered here as a block of text as well. Now there are also inline elements. These are containers for text and other inline elements. So in the examples you can see highlighted here, we may have things like acronyms, we may have a span of text within a paragraph that we want to do something with or treat as an overall element. So where you see HTML drives the web highlighted, that span of text we want to be able to treat as a single unit and do things with it. Maybe it's apply styles or script or something else. The key with these is that block elements can contain other blocks as well as inline. Inline elements really are just containers for text and other inline elements. So you can't have, for example, a span tag, which is an inline element, that contains a div, which is a block element. Let's look at some examples of these various tags that are considered block and inline elements for laying out your document. Let's look at some examples of using block elements versus inline elements. The div is a pretty common item that we'll use, so I might put this in and have this be my overview container. We'll move it in a minute to have that make more sense. And I want to close that tag as well. I can put in here, this is my overview. And if I put another div in here, we'll just call this second div for now. We can put it in and we can say this is another div. We'll save that and re-render, and you can see this is my overview and this is another div rendered on different lines. Now you might think that's because I put them on different lines in the source, but in fact, as we'll see shortly, when it comes to white space, the browsers don't really care. I'll put the divs on the same line and refresh and I have the same output. These are block level elements. This particular element, the div, by default is going to be treated as a block level container and it's going to render, and then whatever follows it is going to render on its own next kind of logical line or space in the document. It's not going to show up in line with that. Now, by contrast, if I put a span, which is an inline element in here for my overview, we'll clean this up a little bit because the white space doesn't matter, and we re-render. Notice again, no changes here. This is an inline element, so this is going to cause overview to be logically grouped under this span, but because it's an inline element, that overview renders right inside of the div. We switch that now and try and make that its own div within there, and we'll even put another item here to spice it up a little bit. Save. Notice now what happens. This is goes on one line because that's the first part of our div, but now we have a new block element here, this div, and so that then the overview is going to show up as a new block. Likewise, the content finishes out there as a block element. So keep that in mind as you're developing that these elements, like the div, are by nature block elements and are going to render in that particular way. Another example of a block level element is the P or paragraph element. I'll put some text in here, just a long string across there, and we'll hit save and reload. And you'll notice now that that renders out as a paragraph of text. If we copy that, we'll get two of those, and as we refresh, notice we see the same kind of rendering where we have these things blocked in their own blocks. It doesn't continue on the same line, but also since it's a paragraph, notice that the spacing is a little different. When we have the div, we're getting this kind of single type spacing. when we have the paragraph, it's going to render it as a paragraph. Most browsers will do this, a paragraph of text with familiar spacing for the rendering and the reading of those paragraph elements. Now, one of the things that you might think about doing is saying, well, I have this big chunk of text or this paragraph, and I want to change that up. Maybe I want to wrap something in here. I want to wrap this piece in a div because I want to call it out in some way. I want to wrap it. We'll save that. Now, the browsers, as we've shown previously, will do their best here to try and help you out. So you could see because it's a div, it got rendered as a block on its own line. And we see a break there. It's just a little weird. But if we take that content, save that, and we go to the validator, the w3.org, we paste that in and check it, we're going to get an error based on the specification. And if we look down here, we'll see that it doesn't really like our div inside of a p tag. Now, the paragraph element is technically rendered as a block or similar to the blocks, but this is a case where the paragraph or other inline elements such as the span can't contain block level elements like div. So while the browser may in fact render it, may even get it to do what you want, you shouldn't do that. You want to follow the specification. You want to make sure that you're creating valid documents. That's going to help you make sure that those things get rendered correctly in all of the browsers that come and view it, and you don't go on the whims of the browser vendor and how they decide to render those strange things you're doing that don't follow the spec.